So I'm not an expert in hydrogen, but I'll do my best and point you towards good resources. As far as I understand, hydrogen energy is quite easy to store. Um, Easier right now, apparently, than renewables would be. And so this is how it's sold. And there's many different ways of creating hydrogen energy. Right now, the most feasible is using fossil fuels. So hydrogen energy that's created right now is with the chemical process using oil or coal to make it. But hypothetically, in the future, more of it would be made using renewable energy. And you see, so right now it's being used as a Trojan horse a company will want to build a big pipeline and say, oh, but in the future it'll be used for hydrogen. But there'll be massive gas reserves in the region that companies are moving towards exploiting and exploring those gas reserves. So we can see with the fraction of investments and work going into producing actual hydrogen from renewable energy and going into renewables in general is minuscule compared to how much is going into the fossil infrastructure. And the amount they talk about how the hydrogen can be green hydrogen and used and made from renewables is huge compared to how much they're talking about the hydrogen energy that will be made from fossil fuels. So yeah, there's potential in some way for it to be renewable, but how it's being used and the intentions of the industry are to use it as a Trojan horse to exploit more fossil fuels and build more fossil fuel infrastructure. And Corporate Europe Observatory and Food and Water Watch Europe have great resources on hydrogen. And it's a similar situation with CCS, where this technology, this half-baked technology that, we'll just store all these emissions underground, usually in old fracking wells, as if it's possible to make the ground everywhere completely airtight, so that methane will never escape. And methane is odorless, it doesn't look like anything, so it just conveniently, they don't regulate much in general in supply chains, gas supply chains, and don't measure much. Yeah, and the same organizations I mentioned before have great resources on this. And then the 3 LNG terminals in Germany, it's absolutely crazy. There's the US offering a lot of money for them to help Germany with it. There's a plan the US are pushing for these terminals, have done a huge amount of lobbying for it. Trump wants to send gas from the east coast of the US to Europe via Germany, and Germany's massively crumpling to this pressure. It's wild to build 3 massive terminals in the same stretch of coastline in the same time frame. And more groups are active against it. And if anyone wants to find out more, be in touch with these groups, feel free to email me.
So why is nuclear power not low CO2? I mean, to be honest, it's lower than gas and coal, if you like, at the moment, but there is still a fairly substantial CO2 footprint, which hasn't really been quantified, to be honest. I mean, you've got to mine the uranium, you've got to bring it here, the either enriched or uranium yellow cake. Nobody has really quantified the CO2 footprint of nuclear waste storage and packaging or whatever. There's emissions from things like the solvents used for enriching uranium, uranium hexafluoride and the like, that can all escape. There's lots of CFCs potentially can escape, and they're potent greenhouse gases. The uranium ores are declining in quality. We've basically taken all the really good stuff. So the lower an ore grade, the more energy you have to put into extracting the uranium from it. So at some point, you're going to get to the point where you're actually putting more energy into extracting the uranium than you get from fissioning it. I'm not saying we're at that point yet, but the CO2 footprint of extracting uranium is going to go up. I think it's around about 10 to 20 parts per million at the moment for ore grade is the level at which it takes more energy to get the uranium out than you get from fissioning it. We're not quite near that yet, but some people are talking about getting uranium from seawater. Yes, there is uranium in seawater, but it's in there at about, I don't know, hundredths or thousandths of a part per million. So it's clearly not energetically viable to get uranium out of seawater. I don't think we need to bother about retiring the fleet. I think we're going to be nuclear fleet. I think they're going to basically be forced into it. They're coming to the end of their natural lives. Most of them. We've just had an extension on the Hunterston reactor. It's got a graphite core, and that's got a series of cracks in it, which for most rational people would make you think maybe it's come to the end of its natural life. But the Office of the Nuclear Regulator extended its life again. Regardless of whether it's safe or not, it's clearly in the end game now. It's sort of drinking in the last chance saloon, and a lot of the other reactors are basically well past pensionable age. I mean, the problem with nuclear power is not that we're killing nuclear power off; it's just coming to the end of its life, if you like. The reactors are aging and will need to be shut down in the not too distant future, and nobody's willing to invest in new ones without massive government support. I mean, it's always been the case that nuclear power plants have needed basically government insurance by default, because you can't get insurance cover for a nuclear power station that covers all the liabilities. That's basically open-ended. But now companies are expecting, large amounts of government support. We've got I don't know what Hinkley Point C was, it with their contract for difference, was it was something like £96 per kilowatt hour they were charging, which is well over. I think wind power is down to about £40 a kilowatt hour now, and that's sort of fixed in. They're going to be charging that for years into the future. So it's just not economically viable, regardless of any supposed green credentials, which can all be, as far as I'm concerned, at least be shot down in flames.
That's a very good question. We have oftentimes been helped by campaigners in the North. We have worked with Friends of the Earth International. We have worked with Global Forest Coalition. We have worked with many of them, including those that actually have never been even here. So the only way you people can help us is, one, to look at the financiers back home, because most of these companies that come to destroy forests here are from the North, or they use pensioners' money from the North. They're not from Africa. So that is one way you can help us. But also we can do some kind of, at global level, for you, there is a way African countries can be influenced, because some of our funding and some of the money we use at the country comes from, some of those countries. If we can be helped that way, that would be the best way to go. Funders level, but also engaging African leaders when they come for those very important meetings, which they come for, just append their signatures and come back home and do business as usual. Yes.
It's going to depend in part on what level a frequent flyer tax is set at and how kind of quickly the steps escalate. And I think it is the case that that wouldn't work as a measure in isolation. So you would want a frequent flyer levy to be brought in as one of the measures to tackle overall levels of aviation. But there's a lot of other issues around the tax structure for aviation. For example, at the moment, you don't pay tax on jet fuel, and you also don't pay VAT on a flight. So flights would be zero rated for VAT, but if you were to buy, for example, a new bike, you're paying 20% VAT on that bike. That's clearly ridiculous. So I think the whole, aviation has a history of lobbying very successfully for generous tax breaks. And yeah, obviously there's other issues as well around, for example, at the moment it's more expensive to take a train rather than a plane. Again, clearly not effective if you want to encourage people to make low carbon travel choices.
Do we do it all under the same umbrella? I think publicity is the key. I think if we can identify these sort of false solutions, and to be fair, I think the public are getting on board. I think with the flights particularly, it's not quite like smoking yet, but it's becoming, people look at you a bit askance. If you're going to Australia, on a regular basis, which a couple of my friends are, people have started asking questions. I think it's entering the public consciousness. I think that's the umbrella we can pull it all under. We get a lot more questioning about nuclear power now. My favourite hobby horse. A lot more people. I've been on XR groups and people have asked about nuclear power, and we've had some interesting discussions. And people are sort of starting to see through the fog of misinformation, if you like. I mean, with something like flights, if you look at a jet aircraft, and then someone's trying to tell you it can be made CO2 neutral, most people are going to sort of look at it a bit askance and think, really? Whether that stops them or not, I think. A lot of the problems we've talked about are things people don't like anyway. They don't like planes flying over them. They don't like burning waste. They're a bit suspicious about nuclear power. So I think the umbrella we need to get it onto is just public acceptance or public non-acceptance, if you like, moving them into the socially unacceptable category. I think we all just carry on pushing in the same direction, I think, and try not to contradict each other, which we don't as a rule. But I mean, I think the nuclear power thing, there's a bit of a movement in some environmental circles that nuclear is a good idea. I mean, there's like George Monbiot, and he's looked at it, and you can see the point he's making. He makes a rational point, but I think he maybe needs to look at in a slightly different way. I think the public are sort of gathering everything together. I think gradually pulling everything together themselves. I'm quite optimistic in that point of view. We never used to talk about this when I was the age of a lot of the people here. The environment was just something, you rode your motorbike through, or you went fishing, or you and climbed a tree in. But now it's become something that is seen to affect our lives in a very direct fashion.
Sure. I really have this fear that, we're doing work on gas, and then maybe we'll win, and then there's going to be just other things. Sometimes I wonder, should we just do a massive, if everyone fighting fossil solutions or fossil fuel industry was working on making renewables happen in the just community-led way that is not an extractivist model. Yeah, I wonder if that as a focus would, if shifting our priority like that could be better. I'm not sure. But I think events like this, coming together like this, is the first time I see a webinar linking up different full solutions. So at least starting these conversations and understanding is a great step.
Thank you very much. I think, like my previous speakers have said, first of all, we need to make a lot of publication, like publicity. I mean, we need to make a lot of publicity. We need to make publications out of this. We need to make powerful messages and flag them out. And also, I think we need such kind of talks. They are very important. And when it comes to, because we're facing climate change at different levels and we are losing resources at different times. So I think people in the North, especially now campaigners like I was asked, should a little bit give us support to ensure that now the remaining few resources already where they are portraying it to be some kind of climate solution, then we denounce it. Let's denounce them strongly, but also let's see how best we can empower some people that have lost their resources just because, I'm talking from the African perspective, where corporation comes and gives resources to some other people to start planting pine in return to benefit from carbon benefits. I think we need to do some bit of economic empowerment, some of these people, so that they resist such kind of cheap talk and keep their natural kind of environment. So I think we need to keep these kinds of debates. We need to make strong publications, but we also need to make engagements at a national level dialogues and engage the media at all levels.
I guess something for me is a common theme of challenging the whole concept of net zero and being like, actually, we need to get to as close to zero carbon as possible. We don't want net zero, we want to stop burning fossil fuels, and that is the most important thing. And anything that is a distraction from that is unhelpful at this point.